All right, so let's talk about how to solve equations. Now, when I have fractions, the first thing I'm going to do, get rid of fractions, but also think of the values that I cannot choose. For example, looking at my first fraction, I think, well, what value of x will make the bottom equal to 0? Because remember, in the fraction, I cannot have a 0 at the bottom. What value of x will make the bottom equal to 0? And I'm just going to say 0. So then I cannot accept x, 0 for x, because I cannot have a 0 at the bottom. I look at my second fraction. What value of x will make the bottom equal to 0? 1. So I cannot accept 1 because I don't want a 0 at the bottom. Now my third fraction, I don't have an x, so I don't worry about it. Now looking at my LCD, I'm going to look at my least common denominator. Looking from the first fraction, I need an x. From the second fraction, I also need an x minus 1. Keep in mind I said also. So I'm going to have an x minus 1 as well. And from my third fraction, I need a 12 as well on my LCD. Okay. So I'm going to get rid of fractions. If I was to cancel the x here, have a 1 on the top. If I was to cancel the x on my LCD, I'm left off with an x minus 1 and a 12. Plus, I have a 1 on top of my fraction. If I was to get rid of the x minus 1 on my LCD, I'm left with an x and a 12. Equals, I have a 7 from the top of my fraction. If I was to cancel the 12 on my LCD, I'm left with an x and an x minus 1. I got rid of fractions. I use my least common denominator to get rid of fractions. Now, let me multiply what I have. 1 times 12, I have 12, times x minus 1. That gives me 12x minus 12. Here I have 1 times 12, that's 12, times x, that gives me plus 12x. To begin with, here I have 7 times x is 7x, times x minus 1. It's going to give me 7x squared minus 7x. All right, let me simplify things a little. On the left side of the equal sign, combine your x's, and we have 24x minus 12 equals 7x squared minus 7x. Okay, so let me move everything to where the x squared is positive. So the 24x, I'm going to move it here as a minus 24x. The minus 12, I'm going to move it as a plus 12. So I have that 0 equals 7x squared minus 31x plus 12. Let's solve for x. Now, we could factor it. We could do the long way. We could do it like how we used to do. Or let me remember the quadratic formula. Remember I gave you guys a story as a bad boy. A bad boy went to a so-called radical party because the boy was being square. He lost a chance with 4 awesome chicks. Everything was over at 2 a.m. I know my A is 7, my B is negative 31, and my C is 12. And I mentioned when we talk about the quadratic formula, I said the hard part is the square root part, the b squared minus 4ac. So let me worry about that first. B squared minus 4ac. So I have negative 31 squared minus 4 times 7 times 12. All right, negative 31 squared, right? 31 times 31. Negative times negative is positive, but 31 times 31 gives me 961 minus 4 times 7 times 12, that is 336. Now, 961 minus 336 equals 625. Let me get the square root of that. The square root of 625 is 25. Good. All I was working was the square root part. Now I'm going to use the whole quadratic formula. Negative b. I know my b is negative, so negative of a negative give me positive 31 plus or minus 25 over, now 2 times a, that's 14. All right, so my value of x could be, using the plus on the top sign, on the top of the fraction, let me use the plus sign first. 31 plus 25, that is 56 over 14. If I use the minus sign, 31 minus 25, that gives me 6 over 14. Simplify your fractions. 56 over 14, 56 divided by 14 is 4. 6 over 14, but 6 divided by 14 I can't do. At least simplify the fraction. I'm going to call this 3 over 7. Nice. Take a look at this part. What values of m I cannot accept are the values of m that are going to make the bottom equal to 0. Let me go back one slide. I double checked that my answers, I didn't have a 0 or 1, which I didn't. So we're good. Okay, now here, what values of m I cannot accept? 0, because that what makes the bottom equal to 0. What values of m make m squared equal to 0? 0. Now my LCD is going to be m squared. So for my first fraction, I have a 5. If I was to cancel 1m from my LCD, I'm left over with 1m. Plus, I have a top on the top. If I was to cancel m squared from my LCD, I will have nothing. Equals 2. 2 is not a fraction, so I have to multiply this with m squared. So I'm left with 5m plus 12 equals 2m squared. I'm going to move everything to where the m squared is positive. So I'm going to move this as a 5m. I'm going to move this as a minus 12. So I have that 0 equals 2m squared minus 5m minus 12. I'm going to use my quadratic formula again. A equals 2, B equals negative 5, and my C equals to negative 12. Let me remember the formula. Bad boy went to a so-called radical party. Because the boy was being squared, he lost a chance with 4 awesome chicks. Everything was over at 2 a.m. I'm going to do the quadratic, the square root part first. So I'm looking at b squared minus 4ac. I'm going to do that, and at the end, I'm going to do the square root of it. All right, so b squared. I have negative 5 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 12. So I have 25 plus. I'm calling it a plus because 2 negative signs make a positive. Now 4 times 2 times 12, that's 96. 25 plus 96 is 121. And then I'm going to do the square root of it, 11. Okay, now let me use the whole quadratic formula. Negative b. I know b is negative, so the negative of a negative will give me, in this case, 5 plus or minus 11 over 2 times a is 4. So let's take a look at my values of m. If I use the plus sign, 5 plus 11, that gives me 16 over 4. If I use the minus sign, 5 minus 11, that gives me a negative 6 over 4. So let's take a look. My values of m, 16 over 4, 16 divided by 4 is 4. Negative 6 over 4, at least let me bring the negative to the front. Now 6 over 4, let me simplify that as 3 over 2. Remember, I cannot accept 0, but 0 is not one of my choices, so that's fine. Now you try these at home. The answer that you should get is that. Now let's take a look at word problems. A river boat for tourists averages 12 miles per hour in still water. So the boat is going, that little engine is going at 12 miles per hour. It takes the boat 1 hour and 4 minutes to go 6 miles upstream and return. Find the speed of the current. So we're going to have a table. The D's for distance. It said it went up 6 miles upstream. So now downstream, it's going to be the same distance. Now the rate, I know the boat was going 12 miles per hour. That's the engine. Now upstream, I'm going against the current. I don't know how fast is the current of the river. I'm going to call it X because I don't know how fast is it. So upstream, I'm going at 12 minus X. Right, 12, how fast the boat is going, minus how much the current is pushing me back. Now downstream, this thing is going at 12 plus X because it's the 12 miles per hour plus the current. Now the time, I know how long it took to go back and forth. But when it was going upstream, it was going at a slower pace than downstream. So I'm not going to say it took it half of the time. Now we know one formula that we should know is distance equals rate times time. We do this when we travel to LA. We're going to travel certain distance. We look at the rate, how fast we're going, how long times the time. So distance equals rate times time. If I was to divide both sides by r, that's what we practiced in previous chapters how to solve for letters. D over r, distance divided by rate, is the time. So for me to figure out the time, I'm going to go d over r. So I'm just going to say 6 over 12 minus x, and then 6 over 12 plus x. So I know how long that I have an expression for upstream and an expression for downstream. So for me to figure out for x, I'm going to add the time. I'm going to say 6 and then 12 minus x plus 6 and then 12 plus x. Let me leave myself some more room. I'm going to do it over here. So the time upstream plus the time downstream equals, now I took it 1 hour and 4 minutes. Now keep in mind the rate we talked about earlier, that miles per hour. So we got to call this everything in hours. How many hours is 1 hour and 4 minutes? So I'm thinking 1 hour. Well, 1 hour is just 1 hour. Now 4 minutes, isn't that 4 over 60? So I'm going to go 1 plus 4 over 60. My 1 hour, I'm just going to call this 60 over 60. That way I have a common denominator. 64 over 60, divide each by 4. That gives me 16 over 15. So 1 hour and 4 minutes, it's 16 over 15 hours. It's a little more than one, right? 1 hour and 4 minutes. So that makes sense. All right, so x cannot be 12 because of my first fraction. That will make it a 0. And x cannot be a negative 12 because that's what will make the bottom equal to 0 in the second fraction. My LCD, my least common denominator, I need a 12 minus x from the first fraction, a 12 plus x from the second fraction, and I need a 15 from the third fraction. All right, so let's get rid of fractions. Have a 6 on the top of my first one. From my LCD, if I was to cancel the 12 minus x, I'm going to have 12 plus x and 15. Plus, have a 6 on top of the second fraction. For my LCD, if I was to cancel the 12 plus x, I'm going to have a 12 minus x and a 15. I have a 16 on top. If I was to cancel the 15, I'm going to have 12 minus x and 12 plus x. Okay. Okay, so bunch of parentheses. Let's get rid of parentheses. Let's make this a little bit easier to read. 6 times 15. I'm going to multiply what I see that it's easier to multiply. 6 times 15, that's 90. So I have 90 times 12 plus x. 90 times 12 is 1080. So I have 1080 plus 90x. Okay. Now here to have 6 times 15, that's another 90. Times 12 minus x. That gives me plus 1080 minus 90x equals. Now here, what I'm going to multiply, 12 minus x times 12 plus x. I'm going to multiply those out. That's going to give me 144 plus 12x minus 12x minus x squared. The 12x's cancel out. So that gives me 144 minus x squared. Okay, now multiply this with the 16. 16 times 144 give me 2304 minus 16x squared. Okay. Now looking on the left side, 90x minus 90x, that's good. It goes away. Now 1080 plus 1080, we have 2160 equals 2304 minus 16x squared. Let me subtract 2304. I have that negative 144 equals negative 16x squared. Let me divide by negative 16. Have that 9 equals x squared. Okay. 9 equals x squared. To get rid of the squared, can I just say x equals 3 or negative 3? Right, because I do the square root on each side. First, I checked. I cannot accept 12 or negative 12. Okay, that's not our answer. Now, negative 3, the river going at a negative rate? Yeah, that doesn't make sense. So the speed of the current is positive 3. Right? The negative 3 doesn't make sense. It cannot go at a negative rate. So the river is going at 3 miles per hour. As shown in this example, when a quadratic equation is used to solve an applied problem, sometimes only one answer satisfies the application. Always check each answer in the words of the original problem. Right? The negative 3 didn't make sense. So I just said positive 3. Now you try these at home. I'm going to help you. Your table should look like that. And then hours, 1.75 hours. You have that. Now you should end up getting that the can rose at 7 miles per hour. Okay, now let's take a look at this other type of questions. It takes 2 carpet layers 4 hours to carpet a room. If each worked alone, one of them could do the job in 1 hour, less time than the other. How long will it take each carpet layer to complete the job alone? Okay, so let's see. We're going to talk about a rate, the time working together, and fractional part of the job done. How much of the work did each of them do? It takes 2 carpet layers 4 hours to complete a room. So time working together, it was 4. They work 4 hours together. Now, the rate, it says if each worked alone, if each of them worked alone, one of them could do the job in 1 hour, less time than the other. Okay, so I don't know how fast is the slow worker working, but I'm going to say one job, he's going to complete it in X many hours. I don't know his rate, but I'm just going to say 1 over X. The faster worker, he does it in 1 hour less. So he's going to say, I'm going to do one job. He's going to do it in X minus 1 hour. Now, the fractional part of the job done is going to be how fast is the rate times how long did it work. So the slower worker, his rate is 1 over X. He worked 4 hours. Just going to write my 4 as a fraction. So he's fractional part of the job done. He did 4 over X. That's how much he did. Now the faster worker, his rate was 1 over X minus 1. He worked 4 over 1 hours as well. So how much of the job he did was 4 over X minus 1. Now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to add how much did each of them do. This lower worker, he did 4 over X. The fast worker, he did 4 over X minus 1. Together, they completed one room. Our X cannot be 0, because that will make the first fraction equal to 0, and cannot be 1, because that will make the second fraction equal to 1. I will make the second fraction a 0 at the bottom. My LCD, I need an X from the first fraction, and I need an X minus 1 from the second fraction. So let's get rid of fractions. On the first, I have a 4 on the top. If I was to cancel the X from my LCD, I'm left with X minus 1. I have a 4 on the top. If I was to cancel the X minus 1 on my LCD, I'm left up with an X. Now here, I'm going to go times X minus 1. I don't cancel anything from my LCD. All right, so let's see. I have 4X minus 4 plus 4X equals, okay, so 1 times X is just X. I get X squared minus X. So I distribute the X. I ignore the 1 at the top, at the very front, because multiplication, the 1 is ignored. So I have that 8X minus 4 equals X squared minus X. I'm going to move the 8X over, the plus 4, 0 equals X squared minus 9X plus 4. If I wanted to do this by factoring, I cannot. So let's solve this using our quadratic formula. I mean, remember my quadratic formula. A bad boy went to so-called radical party because the boy was being square. He lost a chance with 4 awesome chicks. Everything was over at 2 a.m. I know my A is 1, my B is negative 9, and my C is equal to 4. I must do the square root part first. I'm going to do B squared minus 4AC, and then I'll do the square root on that. So B squared, negative 9 squared minus 4 times 1 times 4. Negative 9 times negative 9, that's positive 81 minus 16. Now 81 minus 16, that's 65. Let me get the square root of 65. It's not a perfect square root, so I'm just going to say this is about 8.06. All right, so now let me use the whole quadratic formula. Negative b, I know my b is negative, so negative of a negative, I have 9 plus or minus 8.06 over 2. Okay, 9 plus 8.06 divided by 2. It tells me this is about 8.5. Now, what if I use the minus? 9 minus 8.06 divided by 2, it gives me about 0.5. Okay. Now, 0.5, when I look at the faster worker, his rate is x minus 1. And I think, could x be 0.5? At the bottom, I'm going to have that he's doing it at a negative rate. Okay. So, no. Remember in the rate, I said the slower worker is going to complete one job, he's going to complete it in X many hours. I know the value of X now. So the slower worker, he's working, what's his rate? How long would it take him to complete the job? He's going to complete it in 8.5 hours. How about the faster worker? Remember, we know the value of X now. Just plug in the value of X there. So we have 1 over 7.5. That means that one job gets done in 7.5 hours. And then together, will they do it in 4 hours? Now, this is for you guys to try it. This is how your table should look like. And you guys will get that Jaime gets it done in about 5.2 hours. And Carlos gets it done in about 3.2 hours. All right, now let's get out of the word problems. Let's make this a little bit easier. Let's gotta solve for this. One thing we gotta do is get rid of the square root part. I see a square root symbol. The way I'm gonna get rid of the square root, I'm gonna square both sides. I have k squared equals 6k minus 8. Square root and the squared exponent cancel each other out, so I just get what I have on the inside. I'm going to move everything to the left. K squared minus 6k plus 8 is equal to 0. Move everything where the k squared is positive. I see my a is 1, my b is negative 6, my c is 8. Remember my quadratic formula. Let me write it here in the center. Negative b plus or minus the boy was being squared. He lost a chance with 4 awesome chicks. Everything was over at 2 a.m. Okay, so I'm going to do b squared because I have to do the square root part first. Negative 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 8. I have 36 minus 32. get the square root of that. Okay, so now let me go in there. Negative b, I'm going to use the whole quadratic equation. Negative b, that gives me positive 6, right? Plus or minus 2 times a. If I use the plus sign, first, 6 plus 2, so it's 8 over 2. So that gives me that. If I was to use the minus sign, 6 minus 2 is 4 on the top over 2. So I'm going to say my solution set is going to be 4 and 2. In order for me to get rid of the square root symbol, I must have the square root by itself. So let's take a look at b. Let me get rid of this x first. So I have the square root of x equals 6 minus x. So I'm going to square it. Literally, when I square it, what it means is that I have the same parentheses twice. I literally wrote 6 minus x twice instead of just 6 minus x squared because since I'm going to multiply it, it helps me to remember how to distribute. So I have that x equals, let me distribute the 6, 36 minus 6x. Let me distribute the negative x, negative 6x plus x squared. So I have that x equals, I have, let's see, x squared minus 12x plus 36. Notice how I rearranged by the highest exponent? Let me bring the x over. So I have that 0 equals x squared minus 13x plus 36. All right, I'm going to do my quadratic equation. B squared minus 4ac. So I'm going to do negative 13 squared minus 4 times 1 times 36. Negative 13, right? Negative 13 times negative 13. That gives me 169. Now 4 times 1 times 36 is 144. 169 minus 144 is 25. The square root of 25 is 5. All right, so negative b, I have 13 plus or minus 5 all over 2. If I was to do the plus sign, 13 plus 5, that gives me 18. It gives me 18 over 2. If I was to do the minus sign, 13 minus 5, that gives me 8 over 2. So I get that x equals 9 and 4. Okay. Let's take a look. One thing we got to do is make sure our solutions work. Let me try on example A. Let's see if 4 works. I have that 4. In my original equation, I have that 4 is equal to the square root of 24 minus 8. And notice I went 6 times 4, so 24 minus 8. Now 24 minus 8 is 16th. Is 4 equal to the square root of 16th? Okay, so that works. Now, that doesn't want to erase. Now, what if I do 2? I have that 2 equals 12 minus 8. Is 2 the square root of 4? Good. That works. Now let's try it on example B. Let's see if 9 works. 9 plus the square root of 9 is equal to 6. It's 9 plus 3 equal to 6. Oh, nope, that doesn't work. How about 4? 4 plus the square root of 4 equal to 6. It's 4 plus 2 equal to 6. Yeah, that works. So here, I'm just going to have that x is just 4. The 9 did not make sense. Make sure you solve for them. Make sure you solve for x using the quadratic equation, but make sure you try them. Make sure that both solutions work. Now, for you guys to try some at home, this is what you guys should have. Make sure in example B, the square root is by itself. Make sure you subtract the 1 first before you square each side, and you should end up getting those answers. Now, define a variable u and write each equation in the form a u squared plus bu plus c. Remember our quadratic formula, we had this as ax squared plus bx plus c. So what I'm going for is, on the quadratic formula, we had an x squared. Now here, we have an x to the 4th. So we got to work things out such that my exponent is to the 2nd power. That's what we mean here with work something out. So you just write it as u squared. My case, let u equals x squared, because that means the u squared is equal to x to the 4th. See what I did? I just came in and said, okay, I want this to be u squared. I want it to be x to the 4th. Let me do the square root of it on my exponents. So that means that u, let's see, u squared is equal to x to the 4th. Let me do the square root of it. So u is equal to x squared. Okay, so my u is equal to x squared, and then it says write each equation in the form of a u squared plus bu plus c. So I'm going to write u squared, because remember how we said that u squared equals x to the 4th? So instead of x to the 4th, I'm writing this as u squared minus 13u. Remember how we said u is x squared? Plus 36 is equal to 0. Now, looking at example B, this whole thing looks like it's already to the 2nd power. So I'm just going to say my u in this case is going to be 4m minus 3. So I'm just going to write this as 2 u squared plus 7 u plus 5 equal to 0. We're going to work on these in a little bit, but to begin with, we're just finding what u is. So you guys try this at home. Now let's actually use this. We got to solve for this. Okay, so we know that u to the 2nd is equal to x to the 4th. So u is equal to x squared. So I'm going to let my u equals to x squared. So let me rewrite this as, instead of x to the 4th, I'm going to write this as u squared minus 13u plus 36 is equal to 0. Now, why am I doing this? Because I'm going to solve using my quadratic equation. My a is 1, my b is negative 13, and my c equals 36. So I'm just going to write this. Remember the quadratic formula. A bad boy went to a so-called radical party. Boy was being squared, so he lost a chance with 4 awesome chicks. Everything was over at 2 a.m. All right, b squared. Negative 13 squared minus 4 times 1 times 36. Have 169 minus 144 equals 25. Now the square root of 25 is 5. So I'm going to say that u equals, because I'm solving in this case for u, because that's my variable u. So I'm going to say u equals, now negative b, that's 13, plus or minus 5 over 2. That means my u equals, if I use my plus sign, I know 13 plus 5 is 18 over 2. If I use the minus sign, 13 minus 5 is 8 over 2. So I'm going to say my u is equal to 9 and 4. However, so big however, I'm solving for x. Remember I said u is equal to x squared. So now how am I going to solve for x? I'm going to say x squared is equal to 9. Work that out. Then I'm also going to say x squared is equal to 4 and work that out. Now, if x squared is equal to 9, let me get the square root of each. X equals plus or negative 3. Let me get the square root of each. X equals plus or negative 2. So my solution set, I'm going to write, let me write my negative answers first, starting from the smallest, right? Negative 3 smaller than negative 2. And then 2, 3. One thing I will say is when we're solving for a variable, the highest exponent tells us how many answers we're going to get. Using the quadratic formula, we only can get 2. So that's why we have to replace, something for u and then solve for u. Once we solve for u, we substitute it and then we solve for x. Let's take a look at another example. I have this as 4x to the 4th minus 5x squared plus 1 is equal to 0. I look at my exponent and I'm going to say u to the 2nd is equal to x to the 4th. Let me do the square root. Remember, when we do a square root of an exponent, it's basically the half of the exponent. So that's why I have that u is equal to x to the 2nd. So let me write this. So we have that u to the 2nd is x to the 4th, and u is equal to x squared. So I'm just going to write this as 4 u to the 2nd, because instead of x to the 4th, I'm writing u to the 2nd, minus 5u plus 1 is equal to 0. Let me remember my quadratic formula. Bad boy went to a so-called radical party. Boy was being squared. He lost a chance with 4 awesome chicks. Everything was over at 2 a.m. I must do the square root part first. I know my a is 4, my b is negative 5, and my c is 1. Negative 5 squared minus 4 times 4 times 1. 25 minus 16, that's 9. Now the square root of 9 is 3. Okay, so I'm ready to use my quadratic equation. Negative b, so I'm going to say that u, because remember, from here and down, I have u, my variable is u, so u equals negative b, that's 5, plus or minus 3 over, now 2 times a is 8. If I use the plus sign, 5 plus 3 over 8. If I use the minus sign, 5 minus 3 over 8. So I'm going to say my u is either 1 or 1/4. That's u. I had to solve for x though. I remembered u is x squared. So I have that x squared is equal to 1. Work that out. X squared is equal to 1/4. Work that out. Now, good thing here, x squared equals 1. Let me do the square root of each of it. The square root of 1 is either plus or minus 1. Now, this other one, I'm looking at this as the fraction of two radicals. So x equals plus or minus 1 over 2. So now my solution set, when I'm solving for x, let me write my negative signs first. -1, -1/2. And then my positive numbers. We could have also have factored if you guys wanted to factored. There's a way how to factor these. You could have solved this as, remember x to the 4th, I said you split it into half and half. So x squared, x squared. That's one way we could have done this as well. Now you try these at home. You're going to let u equal to m squared. You're going to solve that u is equal to u is equal to 9 or 1. Remember, you have to let then m squared equals 9, m squared equals 1. So that's what you guys should end up getting. So work one more example. Here I'm going to let my u equals 4m minus 3. The reason why, because I'm going to write this as 2u squared plus 7u plus 5 is equal to 0. From here then on, I'm solving for u. Okay, so let's see. I'm just going to say, all right, so my a is 2, my b is 7, and my c is 5. Remember the quadratic formula. Okay, so I had to do b squared minus 4 times 2 times 5. So I have 49 minus 40. The square root of 9 is 3. Okay. Now my quadratic formula, I have -7 plus or minus 3 all over 4. Remember, I'm solving for u at this moment. If I use the plus sign, -7 plus 3, that gives me -4 over 4. It's better known as -1. If I use the minus sign, that gives me -10 over 4. I'm just going to call that -5 over 2. That's what u is. Okay, let me solve for m then. Remember I said that u equals 4m minus 3. So I'm just going to say that 4m minus 3 is equal to -1. Work that out. Then I'm just going to say 4m minus 3 is equal to -5 over 2. And I'm going to work that out. So the minus 3, I get 4m equals 2. Now 2 over 4, I'll just call that 1/2. Now here, the minus 3, I'm going to move it over as a plus 3. However, my 3, I must write it as a fraction. And I want a 2 at the bottom. So I'm thinking, okay, what number on the top? I'm thinking 2 times 3, 6. Now double check, is 6 over 2 equal to 3? Yes. Okay. The reason why I wrote my 3 as a fraction, because I'm going to combine fractions, so might as well have it as a fraction already. So 4m equals 1 half. Right? Negative 5 plus 6 is positive 1 all over 2. Now let me divide by 4. Let me write this though, my 1 half. Let me divide by 4. When we divide by 4, basically in a fraction, we put the 4 at the bottom. So I can have that m equals 1 over 8. Nice. Simple. You guys try this at home. Let your u equals r plus 3. You're going to end up finding that u equals 1 over 5 and a negative 2. So your r equals negative 5 and negative 14 over 5. I just wrote them in order at the end. A common error when solving problems like those that we just did is that people stop too soon. Once we have solved for u, when we solve for the letter u, we must remember to substitute and solve for the values of the original variable. What we mean with that is, when we had this, we solved for u, we got values for u, and people usually stop there. But no, don't forget that u equals something in terms of m in this case. Solve for the original variable.